The diplomatic vessel cut through the darkness of space like a silver needle. Inside the command deck, Captain Tayson stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the enormous space station grow larger in the view screen. The Galactic Council headquarters looked like a spinning wheel of light and metal, home to thousands of alien species and the center of power for half the known galaxy. Tayson felt the weight of 300 years of human space exploration pressing down on his shoulders. Every colony world, every space station, every human living among the stars was counting on what would happen in the next few hours. He turned to look at HFY, his chief diplomat, who was reviewing her notes one final time. "Are you ready?" Tayson asked. HFY looked up from her data tablet. Her expression was calm, but Tayson could see the tension in her jaw. "As ready as anyone can be for something like this? Do you think they will listen?" "They have to," Tayson said, though he was not entirely sure himself. "We have done everything right. We have followed every protocol, submitted every form, and waited the required time periods. There is no reason for them to refuse us." The communication officer, a young man named Heian Wu, called out from his station. "Captain, we are receiving docking clearance. Bay 17 as scheduled." "Take us in," Tayson ordered. The ship glided into the massive docking bay, surrounded by vessels from a dozen different species. Some looked like organic growths of crystal and bone. Others were geometric shapes that hurt to look at for too long. The human ship, with its clean lines and practical design, seemed almost boring by comparison. Tayson and HFY walked through the corridors of the station with their security escort. The walls were made of some material that shifted colors as they passed, reflecting the bioelectric fields of different species. Aliens of every shape and size moved through the halls. Some walked on legs, others floated, and a few seemed to phase in and out of normal space as they traveled. They reached the council chamber doors, massive structures that stood 30 meters high. A protocol officer, a being that looked like a collection of floating ribbons, greeted them without words. The meaning simply appeared in their minds through a translation implant. They were to enter and present their case when called upon. The doors opened, and the scale of the chamber took Tayson's breath away. The room was a sphere, with the council members seated on platforms that hung in the air at different heights. At the very top sat the High Chancellor Thexmara, an ancient being from the Valorian species. She looked almost human, except for the silver skin and the 3 eyes arranged in a triangle on her face. Tayson and HFY walked to the center platform, which rose slowly to a speaking position. Around them, representatives from 12 major species watched in silence. Some had faces Tayson could read. Others were completely alien, impossible to understand. HFY began the presentation. Her voice was clear and strong, amplified by the chamber's systems so that every being present could hear in their own way of understanding. "Honored members of the Galactic Council, we come before you as representatives of humanity. For 3 centuries we have traveled the stars. We have established 17 colony systems. We have traded peacefully with 43 different species. We have contributed to the galactic economy and respected the laws of space as written by this council." She activated a holographic display that showed the extent of human space. It was small compared to the territories of the major species, but it was growing steadily. "We come before you today to request full membership in the Galactic Council. We believe humanity has proven itself worthy of a voice in galactic affairs. We have much to offer and much to learn from the elder species." Tayson watched the council members carefully. Some seemed to be paying attention. Others appeared bored or distracted. The High Chancellor's 3 eyes tracked HFY's movements but revealed nothing. HFY continued, outlining humanity's achievements in detail. She spoke of human art and culture, of scientific discoveries, of peaceful conflict resolution with neighboring species. She showed statistics on trade, population growth, and technological development. Every piece of information had been carefully chosen to demonstrate that humanity was ready for the responsibilities of council membership. Then came the formal requests. HFY's voice became more serious as she listed them. We request recognition as a sovereign species with full rights under Council law. We request fair trade protections and an end to discriminatory tariffs on human goods. We request access to the Council's historical and scientific databases. We request the right to vote on matters that affect all spacefaring species. We request to be heard. The presentation lasted exactly 1 hour as permitted by protocol. When HFY finished, she and Tae-sun stood together on the platform, waiting for a response. The silence stretched out. Tae-sun expected questions, perhaps challenges or requests for clarification. Instead, there was nothing. The council members sat motionless. Some appeared to be consulting with aides. Others simply stared into empty space. High Chancellor Thexmara raised one hand, a gesture that seemed almost casual. Immediately, the other council members began to rise from their seats. The platform started moving toward the exits. "Wait," HFY said, stepping forward. "We have not received a response to our petition." No one answered. The council members continued filing out of the chamber as if the humans were not even there. Within minutes, the great sphere was empty except for Tae-sun, HFY, and their security escort. The protocol officer appeared again, its ribbons swirling in what might have been an apologetic gesture. The meaning came into their minds. The session was concluded. They were to return to their vessel. On the walk back to the docking bay, HFY was shaking with anger. They did not say a single word. Not one question, not one comment. They just left. How was that even possible? Tae-sun was troubled but tried to remain calm. Perhaps they need time to deliberate. These are ancient beings with ancient procedures. Maybe silence is part of their process. That was not deliberation, HFY said sharply. That was dismissal. They treated us like we were nothing. Back on the ship, Tae-sun gave the order to return to Earth. As the vessel pulled away from the station, Han-woo came to find him on the observation deck. "Captain, I think you should see this," the young officer said, holding out a data tablet. "I have been monitoring Council communications channels. Nothing official, just the general traffic. But I found something strange." Tae-sun took the tablet and read the intercepted messages. They were encoded, but human computers had gotten good at breaking alien encryption. The messages were between various council member species, and they all said essentially the same thing: maintain the silence protocol. Silence protocol? Tae-sun repeated. "I searched the databases," Han-woo explained. "It is not in any of the public council documents, but I found references to it in historical records. Apparently, this is not the first time the council has completely ignored a petition from a younger species. It has happened before many times." Tae-sun felt something cold settle in his stomach. This was not a procedural delay. This was deliberate. The council had chosen to ignore humanity, and it was part of a pattern that stretched back centuries. He looked out at the stars, at the vast darkness between the points of light. Somewhere out there, the council believed it could simply ignore humanity's existence. They would soon learn that silence could cut both ways. The United Earth Assembly Hall was filled with angry voices. Representatives from every human colony world had gathered to hear the report from the council meeting, and none of them were happy with what they heard. Tae-sun stood at the podium, finishing his account of the silent dismissal. Behind him, HFY displayed the intercepted communications that mentioned the silence protocol. The evidence was clear: the council had deliberately ignored them. And it was not an accident or a misunderstanding. Admiral Dongmin stood up from the seat in the military section. He was a large man with gray hair and a face hardened by years of service. His voice boomed across the hall. "This is an insult that cannot be tolerated. They did not just refuse us. They pretended we do not exist. I say we show them that humanity exists. We have the fleet. We have the weapons. One demonstration of force and they will understand they cannot treat us this way." Several representatives shouted their agreement. Others called for calmer approaches. President Soo-jin, sitting in the high seat at the center of the hall, raised her hand for silence. The room gradually quieted. "Admiral Dongmin, I understand your anger," Soo-jin said. Her voice was soft but carried authority. "We are all angry, but we will not make decisions based on emotion. We need to understand what we are facing before we decide how to respond." She turned to Tayson. "Captain, you mentioned that this silence protocol has been used before. Do we know anything else about it?" "Not yet, Madam President," Tayson replied. "But I request permission to investigate further. I believe there is more to this story than we currently know." Sujin nodded. "Permission granted. Take whoever you need and find out why the Council operates this way. We will reconvene in 3 months to discuss your findings." After the assembly ended, Tayson met with the team he had selected. One was there, of course, along with Hyenwu. He had also recruited 2 others. The first was Jie, a xenanthropologist who specialized in studying alien cultures and societies. She was small and quiet, but had a sharp mind that could find patterns where others saw only chaos. The second was Young Sik, a former intelligence operative who had spent years working in the gray areas between human and alien space. He knew how to move unseen and how to find information that others wanted to keep hidden. His face was unremarkable, the kind that people forgot as soon as they looked away, which made him perfect for covert work. "What exactly are we looking for?" Jie asked as they gathered in a secure briefing room. "Answers," Tayson said simply. "Why does the Council ignore younger species? Is it policy or tradition? Is there a way around it? And most importantly, what happened to other species who were treated this way?" Young Sik pulled up a star map. "I have contacts in several minor species territories. Species that are not part of the Council but live in the same space. If anyone knows the real story, it will be them." Over the next 6 months, the team traveled to a dozen different worlds. They spoke with historians, politicians, merchants, and revolutionaries. Slowly, a picture began to form. The Galactic Council was far older than humanity had realized. It had been formed more than 50,000 years ago by a coalition of the first spacefaring species. Over time, it had grown to include 12 major species, all of which had been traveling the stars for at least 20,000 years. The Council operated on a strict hierarchy based on age. The older a species was, the more authority it held. Younger species, no matter how advanced or peaceful, were considered children. They were allowed to exist in Council space, to trade and travel, but they had no voice in decisions that affected the galaxy. Ga discovered the key piece of information in an ancient archive on a world called Kelthera. The archive contained records from hundreds of species that had petitioned the Council over the millennia. Almost all of them had been met with the same silence that humanity experienced. "Look at this," Jay said, projecting the data for the others to see. "Species are categorized by age. If your recorded civilization is less than 50,000 years old, you are automatically classified as an infant species. Infant species are not acknowledged until they reach the age threshold or until they pass a trial." "What kind of trial?" One asked. "That is the problem," Jay replied. "The trials are not standardized. Some species were accepted after demonstrating military power, others after surviving a natural disaster, others after making a major scientific breakthrough. There's no clear path to membership." Young Sik had been digging into the darker corners of galactic history. He found something that troubled him deeply. "There's another side to this," he said. "Species that push too hard for recognition or that try to force the Council's hand. I found records of the Taros incident from 4,000 years ago." He displayed the historical documents. The Taros had been a proud warrior species who were denied Council membership. In response, they launched a military assault on a Council station. The attack failed, but the Council's response was brutal. The Taros were quarantined to their home system, surrounded by a blockade that still existed to this day. No ship could leave Taros space. The species was effectively imprisoned on their own worlds. "The Council uses the Taros story as a warning," Young Sik continued. "They tell it to every species that gets too aggressive in their demands. It is meant to show what happens when you challenge the Council's authority." The team returned to Earth with their findings. Tayson presented everything to President. Sujin in a private meeting before the next assembly session. Sujin listened carefully, asking questions and reviewing the evidence. When Tae-sun finished, she sat back in her chair and was quiet for a long moment. So we have three options, she finally said. We can wait 50,000 years for them to consider us adults. We can demonstrate military force and risk becoming the next Taros, or we can try to find this mysterious trial and pass it. There is a fourth option, Tae-sun said carefully. Sujin raised an eyebrow. I am listening. We stop asking for their permission, Tae-sun said. The Council's power comes from the belief that they are necessary. That only through them can species interact and trade and cooperate. What if we prove that belief wrong? Hey, one leaned forward, understanding where Tae-sun was going. We show the galaxy that humanity can be valuable, can be powerful without the Council's blessing. We build our own relationships. We solve problems they ignore. We become so important that the Council's silence becomes irrelevant. That is a long game, Sujin said. It could take decades. Better decades than millennia, Tae-sun replied. And better than war. When the assembly reconvened, the factions were just as divided as before. Admiral Dongmin still wanted a military response. Others wanted to withdraw from galactic space entirely to focus on human worlds and forget about the Council. But when Sujin presented Tae-sun's findings and his proposed fourth option, something shifted in the room. The debate lasted for 3 days. In the end, the assembly voted to approve what they called the Quiet Revolution. Humanity would not beg for Council membership. They would not attack the Council. Instead, they would simply act as if Council approval did not matter. The plan was ambitious. Human aid organizations would reach out to struggling worlds that the Council ignored. Human engineers would develop technologies and share them freely with species that needed them. Human merchants would offer fair trade to any species willing to deal with them, undercutting the Council-controlled cartels that dominated galactic commerce. We will show them what humanity can do, Sujin announced to the assembly. Not through weapons or demands, but through actions. Let the Council keep their silence. We will make noise enough for both of us. As the assembly cheered, Tae-sun felt a mixture of hope and uncertainty. This path would not be easy. It would require patience, skill, and resources. But it was better than the alternatives. Humanity would not be ignored. They would not be dismissed. They would make themselves impossible to overlook. The Quiet Revolution had begun. 2 years had passed since humanity began the Quiet Revolution, and the galaxy was starting to notice. On the colony world of Paxis 4, a human aid ship arrived carrying food and medical supplies. The world was home to the Moran species, a people who looked like tall, thin beings with skin that changed color based on their emotions. Their world was dying from soil contamination caused by centuries of mining, and the Galactic Council had declared it too expensive to fix. The human team, led by an agricultural specialist named Bo-Ra, brought something better than temporary supplies. They brought a solution. Bo-Ra and her team had developed bacteria specifically engineered to break down the toxic compounds in the soil. Within 6 months, the fields began to recover. Within a year, the Moran were growing their own food again. The Moran elders wept when they saw the first harvest. They offered payment, but Bo-Ra refused. We do not want your money, she said. We want your friendship. Tell others what humanity did here. That is payment enough. On space stations throughout the Outer Rim, human engineers were installing a revolutionary new communication system. The project was led by Jin-Ho, a young genius who had designed a faster-than-light communication network that did not rely on the expensive relay stations controlled by the Council. The old system was slow and costly. Only wealthy species and corporations could afford real-time communication across light years. Jin-Ho's system was faster, more reliable, and he gave it away for free to any species that wanted it. Within months, dozens of minor species had installed the human network. For the first time in their history, distant colonies could talk to their homeworlds instantly without paying the Council's fees. The Council tried to ban the human network, claiming it violated their regulations. But they had no legal authority over species that were not council members, and the minor species refused to give up their new communication abilities. The council's monopoly on galactic communications was broken. In the medical centers of a dozen worlds, human doctors were performing miracles. The Caltharian species was suffering from a plague that had killed billions. The disease attacked their nervous systems, causing slow and painful death. The council's medical experts had studied the plague and declared it incurable. The cost of developing a treatment, they said, was not worth the economic benefit. Dr. Bio Ra, who had finished her work on Paxis 4, took a team to Kelthara. She spent 3 months studying the plague, working alongside Caltharian doctors who had almost given up hope. The disease was complex, constantly mutating, adapting to every treatment they tried. But Bo-Ra noticed something the council doctors had missed. The plague was not actually a single disease. It was 3 separate infections working together, protecting each other. Treat one, and the others would adapt and strengthen. The council doctors had been trying to find a single cure for all 3, which was impossible. Bo-Ra's solution was elegant. Instead of one treatment, she developed 3 separate treatments that had to be given in a specific sequence. The first treatment weakened the primary infection. The second treatment eliminated the secondary infection while the first was still working. The third treatment finished off the last infection before it could adapt. Within weeks of implementing the treatment protocol, Caltharians began to recover. Within months, the plague was under control. Billions of lives were saved. The Caltharian government offered humanity anything they wanted as payment. The Ora asked only for friendship and cooperation. The council was silent about the Caltharian cure, but the rest of the galaxy was not. Stories spread about the humans who gave away life-saving medicine for free. About the humans who fixed worlds the council had abandoned. About the humans who offered fair trade when council corporations demanded exploitation. Human merchants were particularly effective at winning friends. They established trade agreements with minor species that the council barely acknowledged. The terms were always fair, often generous. Human goods were high quality and reasonably priced. More importantly, humans treated their trading partners with respect, as equals rather than inferiors. One by one, species that had existed in the shadow of the council began to turn toward humanity instead. Not in rebellion, but in preference. Why deal with arrogant council corporations when humans offered better terms? Why pay council fees for communication when humans provided it free? Why accept council indifference when humans offered genuine help? Tae-sun and Hae-won traveled constantly during these 2 years, building relationships and managing the expanding network of human influence. They met with leaders of minor species, negotiated trade deals, and coordinated aid missions. It was exhausting work, but the results were undeniable. In a meeting with President Sujin, Hae-won presented a statistical analysis of their progress. We now have formal friendship treaties with 63 species, informal cooperative agreements with over 100 more. Human trade has increased by 400%. More importantly, when these species have problems, they call us now, not the council. Sujin smiled. And what does the council think of all this? They still maintain their silence toward us officially, Tae-sun said. But we are seeing signs of concern. Council corporations are lowering their prices to compete with human merchants. Council aid programs are suddenly becoming more generous. They recognize us as a threat now, even if they will not acknowledge us as equals. Admiral Dongmin, who had reluctantly supported the Quiet Revolution after his military approach was rejected, had to admit it was working. I did not think soft power could be this effective, he said during a strategy meeting. But we are winning more allies than any military campaign could have gained us. Because we are not trying to conquer anyone, Hae-won explained. We are helping them. When you help someone sincerely, without demanding anything in return, they remember. They become friends, not subjects. Not everything went smoothly. There were incidents where council members tried to interfere with human operations. A human trade ship was detained by council security forces on false charges. A human medical team was expelled from a council world for treating members of a lower caste without permission. Council propaganda began spreading stories about humans being dangerous, naive, or secretly plotting to overthrow the established order. But for every negative story the council spread, there were 10 positive stories from the species humanity had helped. The truth was more powerful than propaganda. Humans were not perfect, but they were genuine in their desire to help and cooperate. Youngsik continued his intelligence work, monitoring council communications and activities. He discovered that the council was deeply divided on how to handle humanity. The older, more traditional members wanted to maintain the silence, to wait until humanity either gave up or made a mistake that could be used against them. But some of the younger council members, species that were only 20 or 30,000 years old, were arguing for a different approach. They pointed out that humanity was becoming more influential than some actual council members. Ignoring them was no longer a sustainable strategy. "There is a debate happening behind closed doors," Youngsik reported. "Some council members want to crush us before we become too powerful. Others want to bring us into the fold to control us. A few actually seem to respect what we are doing." "Let them debate," Sujin said. "We will keep working. Every day we help another world, we prove that the Council's way is not the only way. Every species that chooses to work with us over the Council is a vote of confidence in humanity." By the end of the second year, the situation in the galaxy had changed significantly. The Council still held formal power, but their actual influence was slipping. Minor species were finding their voice, empowered by human technology and encouraged by human friendship. The old order was being challenged not by weapons or threats, but by a better alternative. Tay-Sun stood on the observation deck of a human station orbiting a world called Nexus Prime, a trading hub where dozens of species mixed freely. Below, he could see ships from species the Council had ignored for centuries, now thriving thanks to fair trade and cooperation. HA-1 joined him, carrying 2 cups of tea. She handed one to Tay-Sun. "Do you think the Council will ever acknowledge what we have done?" she asked. Tay-Sun sipped his tea and considered the question. "I think they will have to, eventually. But by the time they do, it might not matter anymore. We are building something new here. Something that does not need their permission or their blessing." "A new order?" Haewon said softly. "A better one," Tay-Sun replied. Neither of them knew that their theory was about to be tested in the worst way possible. A crisis was coming that would force the Council to break their silence or watch the galaxy burn. The first reports came from the Outer Rim territories, far from the core worlds where the Council held power. Ships were disappearing. Not destroyed in battle or lost to accidents, but simply vanishing from sensors as if they had never existed. Entire stations went silent in the middle of transmissions, their last messages cut off mid-word. Then the phenomenon itself appeared on long-range sensors. Scientists called it the void rift, though that name barely captured what it truly was. It looked like a crack in space itself, a wound in reality that consumed everything it touched. Stars, planets, ships, stations, all disappeared into the darkness without a trace. The void rift was moving through the outer rim at a steady pace, following a path that would take it through 23 inhabited star systems. Billions of lives were at risk, and the phenomenon showed no signs of slowing or stopping. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. For once, they allowed observers from non-member species to watch the proceedings through broadcast. Humanity, along with dozens of other younger species, watched as the Council debated how to respond to the crisis. Tay-Sun watched from Earth, sitting beside President Sujin in the command center. Hey, one was there too. Along with Admiral Dongmin and the rest of the leadership, High Chancellor Thexmara spoke first, her 3 eyes showing concern for the first time since Tay-Sun had met her. "This phenomenon is unlike anything in our records. We have sent our best scientific minds to study it, but they have found no way to stop or redirect it." Other Council members reported similar findings. The void rift seemed to operate on principles that their technology could not affect. Energy weapons passed through it without effect. Force fields collapsed when they touched it. Even the ancient technologies of the oldest species were useless. We must evacuate the threatened systems, one council member suggested. Move the populations to safe worlds until the phenomenon passes. 23 systems, another council member replied. 70 billion civilians. Where will we move them? How will we move them? We do not have enough ships for an evacuation of that scale. The debate continued for hours, then days. The council members argued about responsibility, about resources, about which species should be evacuated first and which might have to be abandoned. While they debated, the void drift continued its advance. The first system fell 3 days into the council session. 4 billion lives, gone in an instant. On Earth, human scientists were conducting their own analysis of the void drift. Jin-Ho led a team of physicists and mathematicians, studying every scrap of data they could gather. He worked for 72 hours straight, sleeping only when his body forced him to. Surviving on stimulants and determination, on the third night, he found something. He burst into the command center where Tae-sun was monitoring the council's continued debate. "I know what it is," Jin-Ho said, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "The void drift is not a weapon or a natural phenomenon in the traditional sense. It is a collapse of quantum probability fields. Reality itself is falling apart in those regions, and the collapse is spreading. Can we stop it?" Tae-sun asked. "Stop it?" "No," Jin-Ho replied. "But we can predict its path, and I think we can redirect it. The void drift follows lines of quantum instability in space. Those lines are created by the mass and energy distributions of nearby star systems. If we can map those distributions accurately enough and use the right kind of gravitational manipulation, we can push the void drift away from inhabited systems and into empty space." Hey, one looked at the calculations Jin-Ho displayed. "What kind of gravitational manipulation are we talking about?" "Massive," Jin-Ho admitted. "We would need to deploy hundreds of spatial anchors throughout the affected region. Each anchor would generate a localized gravitational field strong enough to influence the quantum probability collapse. It is technology we have been developing for our deep space exploration program, but we have never deployed it on this scale." "Will it work?" President Sujin asked. Jin-Ho hesitated. "In theory, yes. In practice, I am 80% certain. Maybe 75%. We would need to deploy the anchors precisely, and the timing would be critical. If we make a mistake, we could make things worse." Admiral Dongmin spoke up. "What does the council say about this? Have we sent them your findings?" "We sent everything 3 hours ago," Tae-sun said. "We have received no response." They waited. The council continued its debate, now arguing about whether it was economically feasible to evacuate the threatened populations or whether they should focus resources on protecting core worlds instead. The second system fell to the void drift. 6 billion more lives lost. Finally, after 3 days of silence, the council sent a response. It was not a message to Tae-sun or President Sujin. It was an automated acknowledgement that they had received the data. No thanks, no questions, no indication that they planned to use the information. Just a simple confirmation of receipt. One threw her data tablet across the room in frustration. They are going to let billions die because they cannot admit that a younger species might have the answer they need? President Sujin stood up, her face set in determination. Then we will not wait for their permission. Captain Tae-sun, how many ships do we have available? Tae-sun pulled up the fleet status. We can mobilize 300 vessels immediately. Another 200 within 48 hours. It is not enough for a complete evacuation, but if Jin-Ho's plan works, we will not need to evacuate everyone. What about the spatial anchors? Sujin asked Jin-Ho. We have 57 already built, Jin-Ho replied. We can manufacture more, but it will take time. Maybe 3 weeks to have enough for the full deployment. Admiral Dongmin looked at the timeline. The void drift will hit the third system in 2 days. The fourth system in 5 days. We do not have 3 weeks. Sujin looked at each of them in turn. Then we do what we can with what we have. We evacuate as many people as possible from the systems we cannot save, and we deploy the anchors in the systems we can protect. We will not sit here and watch while the council debates and people die. Madam President, one of her advisors said carefully, if we deploy military vessels in council space without permission, especially near inhabited systems, it could be seen as an act of war. Let them see it however they want, Sujin replied. I would rather be accused of war than guilty of inaction. Send the orders. Mobilize the fleet. Within hours, human ships began moving toward the outer rim. The fleet was commanded by Admiral Dongmin himself, with Taesun serving as diplomatic liaison. He once stayed on Earth to coordinate with President Sujin, while Jinho traveled with the fleet to oversee the anchor deployment. The human fleet arrived at the third system 20 hours before the void rift was predicted to reach it. The local population, a species called the Brunari, were in a panic. Their government had been begging the council for help, but no aid had come. When the human ships appeared, broadcasting evacuation protocols in the Brunari language, the response was overwhelming. Millions crowded the spaceports, desperate to escape. The human crews worked without rest, loading refugees onto transport ships. They took on far more people than the ships were designed to carry, packing them into cargo holds and empty spaces. At the same time, Jinho's teams deployed the spatial anchors throughout the system. There were not enough anchors to fully redirect the void rift, but they might slow it down or deflect it slightly. Every hour they could buy meant more lives saved. The void rift arrived exactly when the human calculations predicted. The spatial anchors activated, generating massive gravitational fields. For a terrifying moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, slowly, the edge of the void rift began to curve. Not much, just a few degrees, but it was enough. The void rift passed through the outer edge of the system, consuming 2 uninhabited moons and a mining station, but it missed the main planet. 7 billion Brunari lives were saved. The human evacuation ships carried another 2 million to safety. Refugees who would have died if the planet had been hit. The council broadcast a statement acknowledging the human action. They did not thank humanity. They did not praise the rescue effort. They simply noted that human vessels had operated in council space and that this action had been observed. The statement was cold, clinical, and completely ignored the billions of lives that had been saved. But the rest of the galaxy was not silent. The Brunari government broadcast their gratitude to every system that could receive it. Other species in the path of the void rift began calling for human help, not council assistance. Over the next 2 months, the human fleet worked constantly. They evacuated 12 systems that could not be protected, saving 30 billion lives. They deployed spatial anchors in 11 systems, successfully redirecting the void rift away from inhabited worlds. The operation was the largest coordinated effort in human history, and it was working. Finally, after months of deployment and calculation, Jinho achieved what the council had said was impossible. The human spatial anchors successfully pushed the void rift into a region of empty space far from any inhabited system. The phenomenon would continue for years or decades, but it would threaten no more lives. The galaxy erupted in celebration, but the council remained silent. The celebration lasted for weeks across the outer rim territories. Species that had been saved by human intervention held festivals in honor of their rescuers. Monuments were built. Songs were written. Children were named after the human ships that had carried their families to safety. On Earth, the mood was more subdued. President Sujin stood in the command center, reading reports from across the galaxy. 70 billion lives saved. 11 star systems protected. 30 billion refugees relocated. The numbers were staggering, but the cost had been enormous as well. How many ships did we lose? Sujin asked Taesun. 47 vessels, Taesun replied quietly. 3,000 crew members. They knew the risks. Every one of them volunteered. Sujin closed her eyes briefly, honoring the sacrifice. Then she opened them and returned to work. There was still much to do. The refugees needed permanent homes. The damaged systems needed to be rebuilt. The spatial anchor network needed to be maintained to ensure the void rift stayed in empty space. Admiral Dongmin entered the command center. his face showing exhaustion but also satisfaction. The last refugee ship has reached its destination. All evacuation operations are complete. Good work, Admiral, Sujin said. I know you wanted a military solution to our problems with the Council. This was not the battle you expected. No, Dongmin admitted, but it was the right one. We did not conquer anyone. We saved them. That is worth more than any victory in battle. HFY was monitoring communications from across the galaxy. She noticed something unusual and called the others over to her station. Look at this, she said, displaying a stream of diplomatic messages. 247 species have sent formal requests to establish direct diplomatic relations with Earth, not through the Council. Direct relations. That is more species than are actually in the Council, Tae-sun observed. Exactly, HFY replied. The minor species are not waiting for Council permission anymore. They are just doing it. The Council's authority is collapsing. Young Sik had been monitoring Council communications as usual. He came running into the command center with urgent news. The Council is convening another emergency session, he said. This time it is about us. High Chancellor Thexmara has called for a vote on the human question. They watched the broadcast as the Council gathered once again. This time there was no silence. The chamber was filled with heated debate. Humanity has operated in Council space without authorization, one member declared. They have deployed military technology, interfered with sovereign systems, and encouraged minor species to bypass Council authority. This cannot be tolerated. They saved 70 billion lives while we debated costs and procedures, another member countered. They did what we should have done. What we could not do, because we were too proud to admit a younger species might have answers we did not. The debate raged for hours. Some Council members called for sanctions against humanity. Others argued for immediate admission to the Council. A few tried to maintain that humanity should continue to be ignored, but even they seemed to realize that position was no longer viable. Finally, High Chancellor Thexmara raised her hand for silence. The chamber quieted. For 3 years, this Council has maintained silence toward humanity, Thexmara said. It is our ancient tradition. Species must prove themselves worthy before we acknowledge them. Humanity has proven themselves. Not through military might or empty boasts, but through action. They have helped worlds we ignored. They have saved lives we deemed too expensive to rescue. They have built friendships while we built walls. She paused, and her 3 eyes seemed to focus on something far away. The question before us is not whether humanity is worthy of Council membership. They have demonstrated their worth beyond any doubt. The question is whether this Council is still worthy to be the center of galactic governance. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Thexmara continued speaking over the noise. I propose that we invite humanity to join the Galactic Council, not as junior members but as full equals. Furthermore, I propose that we reform Council membership rules to allow any species that demonstrates capability and goodwill to apply, regardless of age. The galaxy is changing. We must change with it or become irrelevant. The vote was called. It was not unanimous. Several of the oldest Council members voted against the proposal, unable to abandon traditions that had stood for 50,000 years, but the majority voted in favor. Humanity's petition for Council membership was approved. The message was sent to Earth through official channels. It arrived while President Su Jin was meeting with her advisors about the refugee resettlement program. Su Jin read the message aloud. The Galactic Council hereby approves humanity's petition for full membership. Humanity is invited to send representatives to take their seat on the Council at their earliest convenience. The Council acknowledges humanity's contributions to galactic welfare and looks forward to working together for the good of all species. The room was silent for a moment. Then HFY laughed. They did it, she said. They finally acknowledged us. After everything we have been through, they finally said the words. So we won, Admiral Dongmin said. 3 years of work, and we got what we wanted. But Tae-sun was watching President Sujin's face. She did not look happy. She looked thoughtful. Madam President? Taesun prompted. Su-Jin set down the message and looked at each of them. Did we win? We wanted council membership because we thought it would give us a voice in the galaxy. We thought we needed their recognition to matter. But over the past 3 years, what have we learned? That we do not need them, Haewon said slowly, understanding. We have built relationships with hundreds of species without council approval. We have solved problems the council could not solve. We have influence without their blessing. Exactly, Sujin said. If we join the council now, we become part of their system. We play by their rules. We become just another member, subject to their ancient traditions and slow procedures. Is that really what we want? What is the alternative? Admiral Dongmin asked. Sujin smiled. We chart our own path. We continue building the network of friendships and cooperation we have started. We show the galaxy that there is another way. She turned to Taesun. Captain, I want you to draft a response to the council. Be polite, be respectful, but decline their invitation. The room erupted in shocked voices. Everyone tried to speak at once. Sujin raised her hand for quiet. Think about it, she said. If we join the council, we are accepting that they are the legitimate authority in the galaxy. We are saying that their way is the right way, but their way ignored billions of suffering people. Their way prioritizes age over ability. Their way almost let the Voidrift kill 70 billion lives because they were too proud to accept help from a younger species. She stood and walked to the window. Looking out at Earth below, I do not want humanity to become part of that system. I want us to build something better. Let the council reform themselves if they choose. We will work with them when our interests align, but we will not surrender the independence we have built. Taesun understood. It was a bold choice, perhaps a dangerous one, but it was also the right one. He began drafting the response. 3 days later, President Sujin delivered humanity's answer in a broadcast that was transmitted to every corner of the galaxy. The United Earth Assembly thanks the Galactic Council for their consideration of our petition. We are honored by their invitation to join as full members. However, after careful deliberation, we must respectfully decline membership at this time. The galaxy held its breath. Over the past 3 years, humanity has learned that we can contribute to galactic welfare without council membership. We have built friendships with hundreds of species based on mutual respect and cooperation. We have faced challenges together and found solutions together. We have created something new, a network of relationships that does not depend on ancient hierarchies or formal authorities. Sujin's voice was calm but firm. We do not reject the council or its members. We will continue to work with any species or organization that shares our values of cooperation, mutual aid, and respect for all beings regardless of age or origin. But we believe the galaxy benefits from having multiple centers of cooperation rather than a single authority. She paused, then delivered the final statement. We heard the council's silence for 3 years. Now we ask them to hear ours. Not a silence of dismissal or disrespect, but a silence of independence. Humanity will chart its own course. We invite any species that shares our vision to join us in building a better galaxy. The broadcast ended. In the command center, they waited to see how the galaxy would respond. The council issued a statement, expressing disappointment but accepting humanity's decision. High Chancellor Thexmara added a personal note saying, she hoped humanity would reconsider in the future, but the real response came from the minor species. Within days, 73 species formally withdrew from council oversight and joined what they were calling the Free Species Accord, a loose alliance centered on cooperation rather than hierarchy. Within weeks, the number grew to over 100. The Galactic Council still existed. The ancient species still held enormous power, but their monopoly on galactic governance was broken. The galaxy now had choices.